Hey, it's Ryan Seacrest. Life comes at you fast, which is why it's important to find some time to relax. A little you time. Enter Chumba Casino. With no download required, you can jump on anytime, anywhere for the chance to redeem some serious prizes. So treat yourself with Chumba Casino and play over 100 online casino-style games, all for free. Go to ChumbaCasino.com to collect your free welcome bonus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello and welcome to the Cult Vault Podcast, your dedicated podcast for uncovering the darkest corners of cults and coercive control. I'm your host, Casey, and I want to start by thanking each and every one of you for tuning in. Your support fuels our deep dives into these critical issues. Before we get started, a word of caution. Today's episode may contain discussions on abuse, including graphic descriptions of abuse, and covers a variety of human rights violations that may be triggering for some listeners. Please consider this as a trigger warning and proceed with caution. I'm thrilled to announce that I'll be appearing at CrimeCon UK in London on the 7th and 8th of June 2025, and again in Manchester on the 27th of September 2025. Join me and a host of world-leading experts, advocates, and noisemakers at the heart of the true crime community. This is the UK's biggest true crime event, and you won't want to miss it. Use the code CULT, C-U-L-T, for 10% off your tickets. And remember, there are flexible tickets and payment plans available to accommodate everyone. This incredible event is sponsored by True Crime, and it's always my favourite weekend of the year. I hope to see some of you there. And for those who want even more from the Cult Vault podcast, you can access early, ad-free content by supporting me at patreon.com/thecultvault, where every pledge not only gives you exclusive access, but also directly supports the continuation of this work. Thank you again for your support and your listenership. Now, let's unlock the vault. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Cult Vault podcast. Today, I am sitting down with somebody to talk about a cultic group that this individual was introduced to later in life. So not a case of somebody being born and raised. So hello and welcome to the show, Michael.
Hey, thanks for having me, Casey. Appreciate it.
I usually start these episodes by asking each guest to introduce themselves to the listeners.
Of course. So I'm Michael, in my 30s, grew up in New York, kind of born and raised in the suburbs of New York City. Lived there for a long time. In my 20s, moved out to Los Angeles, lived there for a little while, kind of fell in love with that whole West Coast vibe. And but now I'm back in New York, raising a family, 2 little girls. And, I reside in New York. I work in kind of the music technology industry. So that's like my kind of day job. And, always kind of was a, seeker, still very actively involved in, certain aspects like meditation and mindfulness and reading and things like that. So I guess that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Would you say that compared to one another, maybe you don't know, but compared to one another, New York or LA, where do you think you're more likely to run into cultic groups?
Oh, I'd say definitely LA. I don't think New York Cityers are going to put up with any type of control or they're not even going to be able to stop to take the literature or something. They're going to just get out of my way. So I think you'd probably see a little bit more of that in Los Angeles and California, which I think actually, like, historically, I think that's kind of like a city and a state known for, cult kind of activity and groups. But not to say it can't happen in New York, because you'd be surprised how many groups there are in upstate New York, right? Happening in upstate New York. But New York City, no way. It's probably a lot more difficult.
Yeah, it's funny to think about, notorious cults from the past, like I think it was the Sullivanians who were upstate New York. And then I have a friend, Spencer Schneider, who came on the podcast a number of times, and he talked about an esoteric cult in Manhattan that nobody knew about. It was like sort of like an underground group, and it didn't even have a name. They would just, kind of like pass each other in the street and pretend that they didn't know each other if they saw each other. So even if there were cultic groups, perhaps they're more behind the scenes.
Yeah, of course, of course. Well, I think also, I think City Yoga is in upstate New York, which is, kind of notorious for abuse. So they do happen.
So you mentioned that you have always been a seeker, that you are still practicing things like meditation and mindfulness post cultic experience. What was your life like before you got involved with the group? Was there any particular sort of transitional period or vulnerability that you think led you down this path, or was it just sort of a chance encounter?
Life, like, I think a lot of times we can really like look at it like backwards and see indicators. And it's like we can start to see a picture forming or a narrative when we look at it backwards. Most of my life was spent being creative. From a very young age, I was always had a video camera or a camera, was always writing, creating, doing different creative projects. Then I got into music, in my teenage years, started to play music and create bands and be a music artist. And for a really long time, that was kind of like my main pursuit, which is kind of funny because now I'm working in the music industry just with technology. And then from a young age, I was always really into technology. I was always into like hacking and coding and tech and computers and software. And, I was like in love, like not many kids, are like in love with MS-DOS, which was if you remember, was the old way to boot up different programs. And so it's kind of funny now looking back, like where I'm at now, working in the music industry and being involved in technology. It's kind of like perfect. But that was kind of my life for a very long time was, being, I was always like, kind of like what I'd call like street smart and, creative. And definitely what's funny about me is I was and still am very kind of anti-authority. And I have a little anarchist in me, so that's kind of like always kind of how I was, just doing my own thing and creating my own world. And also like, I always considered myself to be friendly. I'm very outgoing, outspoken. I always like to work with other people and learn about other people. I'm very, extroverted. So that was kind of my upbringing. And, so throughout my teens and early 20s, that's kind of what I did, But I think somewhere in my 20s, I started to get anxious. I started to really start to suffer from, anxiety, stress at a young age, which is kind of weird. I think a lot of these things, sometimes we learn them from our parents and how they are. We pick up their mode or their way of being sometimes. And so it's kind of like something that at an early age, I was way too anxious, way too much anxiety for, and, I didn't want to like take medication and, I didn't want to, so I started to, really think about my life and what I was doing. And, I was in rock bands and that can be a very, on the go life. And it's, it's kind of, it can be stressful in itself. You're touring, you're traveling, you're in a van with 4 or 5 other guys all the time. And you're also trying to like make a career out of being a musician, which is like, being an actor musician as a career is one of the hardest things you can do, right? A very small percentage of people earn a living doing that. So I just, in my early 20s, was trying to figure out who I was, and, whether it's like you're going through a physical ailment or you're going through like mental health issues, I think we're all very vulnerable in our 20s, right? We're trying to figure out who we are and we're trying to figure out what we want to be, and we feel insecure and, we want to help the world or we want to do more with our lives. I think a lot of people, and that's actually a great way to be. Like it's completely natural and normal and healthy to want to help and to want to be contributing to the world and society. I think that's a healthy thought and a healthy emotion. So that led me to, start to kind of evaluate my life. I always felt like there was more to life than just what I was doing at the time. Again, I think a lot of people in their 20s go through that. And it kind of led me to a place of unhappiness, in my early 20s to mid 20s. I was like kind of unhappy with the way things were going. And I felt stuck in like a cycle of a way of living. And, one day I saw an old friend talking about meditation, talking about, spirituality, and it kind of piqued my interest. It definitely piqued my interest. I felt some kind of connection to it, and I had no background in that at all. Like I was like straight rocker dude, like playing guitar, drinking beer, like partying on the weekends, traveling in a van. Like I had never read any spiritual literature. Which there's a funny story within this story about when I was 17. I went to this rehearsal space in New York, in Orangeburg, New York. And I met this guy, Kevin, right? And through meeting this guy, Kevin, who was a sound engineer, that connection comes back into my life about 15 years later that I'll explain at some point. But we'll just put that kind of on the back burner. But so yeah, I had no spiritual acumen, no interest in that at all. And but once I started to hear about meditation and the kind of inner feelings I was having, I got curious. So I started to link up with this friend from high school and, started to join in on some meditations. He had a little thing going on in New York as well. And meditation felt really good, and to this day, I still meditate, right? I still find a lot of benefit from waking up early, meditating, journaling, doing some yoga or light stretching in the morning, like setting intentional, activities in the morning for your day. So that's kind of how I got into that realm, though, what I call like the layer where you get exposed to kind of some, spiritual practices, which can be like a positive thing, right? The practices can be positive, so then I started reading, I picked up a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi, which is a very famous book. A lot of spiritual seekers read that book. I think Steve Jobs, was very influenced by that book when he went to India, and just a lot of people, and I still once in a while will go to the Yogananda Lake Shrine in Los Angeles. It's a beautiful space. So I started reading that book. I started reading the books of Ram Dass, who was a teacher. I started to, listen to, some things like Krishna Das music, Jayatal. Started to get into that kind of world and read more about Buddhism, Hinduism, read a little bit of the Bhagavad Gita. And I started to really, enjoy the way I started feeling from these things. It showed me this kind of other world that I didn't really know existed, and then was hanging out with this friend. And then, one thing led to another. And then after a few months, I met a woman who came, we'll call her Simi, and she, started to kind of come into this group, and she was kind of presented as this enlightened master, this guru, and that's kind of the genesis for how it all started. That's kind of the beginning.
When you are introduced to somebody that is described as an enlightened being, at this point through the different things that you've been reading and just kind of introducing yourself to, had you come across these types of terms and knew at that point what significance that had in things like Buddhism and Hinduism to come across an enlightened being?
Yeah, so they definitely discuss it a lot, Well, the Bhagavad Gita doesn't talk about enlightened beings, right? The Bhagavad Gita is more a story, right, of, a king, and he's talking to his kind of confidant who, is basically kind of like God in a human form, right? So the Gita doesn't necessarily go into that. A book like Autobiography for a Yogi would probably talk about like enlightened beings. You definitely develop a little bit of like magical thinking, and so like obviously like we all know that miracles exist in the world, but it doesn't mean that just because you do a certain set of things or systems or say a certain set of words that you're going to create miracles, right? That's the difference. So I think you start to develop a bit of magical thinking, through sometimes, especially if you're new to it or you're naive, it's a new thing, It's like talking about princesses and knights when you're a kid, and then you go to a birthday party and there's a woman there dressed as a princess, and you're like, oh my God, a prince, it's like you're It's like very magical as a child, right? So it's a similar thing, you know. You probably see it a lot in the business world too, where you hear about this CEO who runs a $500 million company, and you're trying to become a business person, and then you meet them, and it's a magic, you know, it's like there's a experience, there's an aura around this person, you know. So that's how it is. And then not to mention undue influence, right? Which is, you know, you're giving undue influence to a person that you've never met, you know, which is a very interesting psychological phenomenon, right? So the other thing too with this group is this is all your friends. All my friends are involved in it, right? There was about 5 people I knew that also came and started coming to this group and these courses that I had known since high school. So it's not like I just met some group that, you know, were strangers, right? I'm being introduced to this woman by a group of friends, right? So your guard is already down. You're this part of you that might be a little bit more defensive in thought and, you know, kind of protection is kind of already lowered. So that's an interesting thing also.
My friend who I did my master's course with, that was basically what her research was centered around, looking at the differences between cult recruitment, if it's word of mouth and through mutual connections and friends, and recruitment like, you know, on a college campus or on the street or at the supermarket, just like a chance encounter. I say chance encounter because I don't really know if people that are deployed for cult recruitment ever do chance encounters. I think there's probably always a level of calculation there, but I don't know if that's just me being really cynical. And I think what you said about the social proofing, you know, if you're new to all of this and you have a few friends that have been doing it for a bit longer and you kind of follow their lead a little bit more, I suppose. So if they say, wow, Simi's the real deal, she knows what she's talking about, I would be like, wow, I guess she really must know what she's talking about, because I trust my friends and I trust their opinions and I trust their intelligence. So I don't know if that's how it all worked out for you and sort of what your first impressions of Simi were.
100%, because every leader of groups like this, high control groups, there's some type of mythology behind them, right? That gets passed on through the different members through language, right? And language is really, you know, language is like the virus that spreads amongst these groups, right? Because it's, you know, I'm reading now the book Cultish, you know, and it's all about that. And it's not just spiritual groups. It could be, you know, one of the ones that's in there are like exercise and workout groups. There's multi-level marketing. There's, you know, people that create these groups around products and, you know, the like a MacBook. And so, but in order for these things to spread and these ideas to spread and to kind of capture your mind and imagination, language needs to happen, right? It needs to spread through speaking and reading most of the time, right? I think that's an interesting thing. So yes, when you come into these groups, typically there is a mythology behind the leader or behind the person that is kind of leading these courses. And, you know, as a young, naive person in their 20s, you don't really question it. You don't think that you're going to brush up against a narcissist because you don't even know what a narcissist is yet. You're so young. You haven't, unless you've experienced that, or you're studying psychology or clusters or, you know, these types of personality disorders. You don't really brush up against that many people like that, you know? So most of us are trusting. Most of us are open. Most of us don't think that the person sitting across from us has an ulterior motive for us, right? So I think that's something that young people should really look out for, right? And I call it the exposure layer. It's the dinner. It's the yoga class. It's the music performance. It's the thing that doesn't seem like it's that big a deal that kind of pulls you into the orbit of these groups, right? And that's kind of your first exposure to them. And then typically it's like, oh, do you want to help out more? Or would you like to help us set up the next one? Or would you like to teach a course eventually? Or would you like to, hit the streets and try to raise some money for the organization with me next weekend? Or, you know, and that's like that slow kind of takeover of your personality and your mind that, you know, I personally experienced, right? I experienced that.
is Ryan here, and I have a question for you. What do you do when you win? Like, are you a fist pumper, a woohooer, a hand clapper, a high fiver? If you want to hone in on those winning moves, check out Chumba Casino. Choose from hundreds of social casino style games for your chance to redeem serious cash prizes. There are new game releases weekly, plus free daily bonuses. So don't wait. Start having the most fun ever at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
And I suppose it's not just, we're going to go do a yoga class or, here's a free book for you to read. That typically, I imagine, comes with other smaller moments of indoctrination, whether that's through social proofing again, or whether that's through, the loaded language that you've mentioned. And it's really, sorry, it's always really tough to hear people talk about their positive characteristics. You've talked about being friendly and outgoing and open and wanting to contribute to society. And these are all ideal characteristics for an abusive person to exploit. People that are exploitative will be looking for somebody that has these positive character traits and characteristics and think, I can use them to sort of enhance my own nefarious goals. And that's always really... It's always really tricky to hear, because I feel like sometimes after a cultic experience, people talk about those positive traits differently, almost like they were part of the reason why a person gets caught up in a cult to begin with. And I know some people say that they don't really trust themselves and their own instincts after a cultic experience, and that's not the same with everybody. But it's just, I just wanted to make that point for anybody listening that hopefully those are characteristics that you still have and can carry with you after a cultic experience, because they're beautiful things to have in life and to be able to say about yourself as well.
Firsthand, people in our group, basically backburner their own personality. And it's sad. It's like, you're a beautiful person. You're who you are. And it's okay to be unique. These groups, at least the group I was in, they demonize individuality. They do, right? It's almost frowned upon to be an individual. But what makes you so special is you're an individual that's part of a whole. The world needs musicians. The world needs bankers. The world needs doctors. The world needs architects. The world needs funny people. It needs serious people. It needs quiet people. It needs loud people. Everyone is okay the way that they just are right now. And that's the main thing that I try to emphasize about these groups is they want to reprogram you, right? To, essentially be the way a lot of times that the leader wants you to be. And I've experienced that firsthand, you want to please the leader. You want to please the people in the group. You want to conform and align in a certain way that is degrading to your own spirit, if you read Steve Hassan and you read about his BITE model, right? You have behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. All those things is what makes you who you are. Your emotions are what make you who you are. Your thoughts, your dreams, your beliefs, your ability to make art and create paintings, and that's who you are. And that's the beauty of all of this. And I've seen the crushing experience of taking an artist and making him be a full-time chef. I've seen, a photographer and videographer who's very creative and insightful. And he's just deduced to a laborer or, a sous chef now for 24 hours a day. And, I've seen people, who are very talented, not be able to express that given gift that God gave you, and it hurts. And so anyway, getting back to Steve Hassan, he also talks about the pseudo personality, where you have almost like your personality and then a parallel personality that the group creates, the cult creates, the leader creates. And at times they kind of come in and out, right? Like you'll see the original personality shine through in a joke, in a laughter, in a moment. But then you can actually, sometimes I've seen like the other one almost glaze over, the person, right? And it's very like, if you're paying attention, it can be very alarming or disturbing to see the two of them trying to interact. Like, I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't laugh at this. I shouldn't talk like this. I shouldn't watch, like, like any of that matters, right? At the end of the day. Even in our group, we weren't allowed to wear black. I like wearing black. I'm wearing black right now. It is what it is. Like, who cares? So one of the biggest things for me coming out of the group was trying to figure out my identity again and realizing like what I like as just Michael, not what I like because it pleases the cult leader or the group and, aligns with what they want to do. But I've seen the bite model enacted 110%, right? And it's very creepy.
When you are introduced to Simi and you have some of these kind of exposure experiences, how would you say you continue down sort of the funnel? Is usually the term I use. You get into a group through many different moments of exposure, many different avenues to kind of coming across a group. The more you go through this funnel, the more and more you become isolated and dependent on the leader and cutting off ties with the outside world. And of course, the funnel is not the same for everybody, but how would you describe your experience of going further into the group?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So met her in New York, spent, maybe the fall and winter here, Skype classes. She would come, she'd fly in and become a big production, buying sandwiches and, inviting people and, again, pretending like, this is the guru and, trying to like integrate, certain Indian practices into what we were doing, just to kind of, create this grandiose like environment for her, which is fine, right? Whatever. I'm sure if the president visited my house, I would clean, I'm not just gonna, leave the towels on the floor. But
get some sandwiches in, yeah.
yeah. So after a few months, my at the time partner, who was a female, in the group, kind of involved with the group as well. We moved out to Los Angeles, where the main headquarters was about an hour north of Los Angeles, and we were living in LA, working in LA. But every weekend now, we were traveling up to the headquarters, the temple, right? And then at that space, we were cleaning, we were sweeping, we were mopping, we were sleeping there on the floor, mattresses on the floor or mats on the floor type thing. We were taking these courses and classes, cooking and cleaning, and that's how the weekend would go. And then Sunday night, we'd go back to LA and then literally rinse and repeat. One of the things that I always say, though, that really helped me not get fully indoctrinated like some of the other members, right? Not fully give up my life, career, job, money, and all that, was my natural seeking. Okay. So I still would read other spiritual books. I read books on Buddhism. I would listen to Adyashanti, who's a Buddhist teacher. I would read Ram Dass. I got really into and felt a deep connection to Neem Karoli Baba, who is, the teacher of Ram Dass. And I got really into Krishna Das. And then I would go to the Agape Spiritual Center in Los Angeles, where Michael Beckwith would give talks, and they had things going on there, which is a very beautiful community, right? Open to transgender, open to all different religions, all different, open to atheism, like just everything, right? Just come on in, let's just hang, right? Like they're very, very beautiful community. But again, you can come and go as you want, right? That's the difference between, communities that are healthy and unhealthy. So same thing, I do a lot with Krishna Das. I help set up for their kirtans and their musical performances, but the difference being I can come and go. It's an act of me wanting to be there versus me being bonded by choice to be there, right? The bonded choice is a big thing in these groups, which I've experienced firsthand as well. That you think these people can leave, you think there's a choice, but there isn't, right? It's like me telling you, yeah, you can leave, but you're going to die. If the person believes that, that's not a choice anymore, right? It's taken them over. So I'll just say, like, during this initial time period, one of the things that kept me from really, getting fully indoctrinated was my earnest seeking, my still reading other books, my still looking at other teachers and following other things and really exploring and wanting to learn more, right? That wound up being part of my saving grace. So
Were
so
you
that was kind of my initial.
were you encouraged not to continue those kind of personal practices of reading things and exploring different Buddhist options?
100%. Yeah. I mean, the group itself polices you kind of, a lot of like, well, why are you reading that if we have this, physical teacher that's enlightened here? Or, if it's not like Sri Aurobindo or, this thing that's been approved by the group, like, why are you, it's kind of like there was kind of some of like questioning of why would you need to like follow that teacher? And, and then she herself would kind of denounce like Eckhart Tolle and Deepak Chopra as not real masters and teachers. And it's like, who cares? Like, if it helps someone, if it helps somebody out, if it puts somebody in a place that helps them, if they feel a connection, who cares if it's not an enlightened master that you have qualified, because these people, they forget, like, okay, if there is an omnipresent God, then why are you telling me that this thing that I'm reading from this, Eckhart Tolle or Deepak Chopra doesn't count as that omnipresence, that it's not coming through them? Why it only comes through you? It can only come through people you think. So it's just very loaded, and that always kind of like rubbed me the wrong way. But that's 100%, right? Remember we said the BITE model, information control. You can read this, but you shouldn't read this,
Yeah. I've spoken to people as well who have got that kind of like little rebellious streak that you're describing, where somebody has said, in leadership, oh, you can never read something by this person. And then they've gone, well, now I have to. Like, why? Why can't I? Like, I'm more interested. If you wouldn't have mentioned their name, I would not have gone out of my way and put myself in potential like trouble to find out why you don't want me to know about this person.
100%. And I told you in the beginning, like, I'm anti-authority, ish, and I'm very anarchist. And, one thing I learned through this whole experience is I'm very uncontrollable. Like, and that's not a bad thing. It's who I am, and it's what makes me, and I'd actually, advise other people to be a little less sheepish, think for yourself.
Like that. I like to hear you talk about those kind of characteristics in a kind of empowering way, because again, some people lose that after a quantum experience, and you can understand why. And I can see why somebody who maybe has given up their career, given up their home, left their families, kind of slowly been encouraged. I wouldn't say encouraged, I'd say coerced, but whichever language people choose to use, people that have really given over their whole lives through pressure, through coercion, through indoctrination, I can see why perhaps somebody might think to themselves, well, I can't read that book and I can't go near that person's teachings and I must stay away from all of those things because I don't want to put myself in jeopardy. Because at that point, what else does a person have other than their community?
Well, I'll tell you something that someone, told me, and it was Krishnadas, who, is he's a singer. I get to talk to him once in a while, which is a real like cool thing for me, because I admire him. And he told me that, spirituality is about learning to trust your own heart. It's not about someone telling you what to do. It's not about someone telling you how to live or how to behave or their version. It's about basically learning to start trusting yourself, because this is something that like none of us have been taught. None of us have been, supported to go out into the world and trust our own heart and trust our own journey, So I implore people to, do more of that. Like, there's nothing wrong with spirituality. There's nothing wrong with meditation. There's nothing wrong with yoga and poses and things that are helpful. And, and there's nothing wrong with reading the Gita or the Tao or the Bible or whatever. But it's like, with these groups, it's like, what can you leave? What happens if you want to leave? What happens if you want to, go do your own thing? What happens if you want to act as an independent human? How do they treat you? How do they respond to that? How do they react? Right. And, is it based on fear? Are your choices based on fear? I was living for many years with a lot of fear in my heart, right? A lot of fear of what would happen, if life fell apart. And for me, life did fall apart. I lost, part of me losing, I think, my marriage was because of this group, and, the things that are the scariest things, like, once they happen, right? Once you can't stop them and you just need to embrace them, you gain a strength. You learn to trust your own heart more. And once you start to do that, nobody can take that away from you eventually, this group tried to tell me who I was, who I wasn't, tried to tell me what to think, tried to tell me what to believe. But at the end of the day, none of it matters, because there's an inner voice. And I even think for people inside these groups still, that voice is in there. They just suppress it and push it down. But for me, that voice just became louder and louder and louder, that something is not right. This is not right. This is not, and it wasn't until I left also, kind of the group, I was threatened by the group leader. She threatened to take me away and separate me from my, ex-wife and my children. It wasn't until that happened that I really realized, like, this is not what I thought it was. And, little cracks formed along the way, Casey. And that was the one where, like, the glass just smashed, and I realized, like, that's not how you treat people. This is not love. This is not, the right thing. And then once I kind of got into that space, I started to talk to ex-members, which of course is demonized, right? You don't talk to ex-members because they're evil, they're corrupt, they don't understand. It's the same story too in every group, right? It's right. Very rare to differ. And through learning, from ex-members, I learned about so much more. I'm not going to go into all of it, but I just learned about so much more, like, terrible, disturbing stuff that was happening that, like, we were all kept in the dark from. Again, in control. Cults, they work like a bullseye, right? And you have the center is the leader, and then there's a smaller group and a bigger, and it kind of goes bullseyeing out. You have your very core members that have the most access to all the real information. And then as it kind of goes out to other members, they know less and less. And there's a lot of information control, in these groups. And that's why they try to control, speaking to ex-members, because they don't want you being, hearing some of the information that's happened.
Riley Herbst from 2311 Racing here, and you know what grinds my gears? Waiting for coffee. But instead of counting frappes and lattes, I fire up Chumba Casino. No apps, no fuss, just fun social casino games to pass the time. By the time my coffee's ready, order for Riley! I've already taken a few victory laps. Next time you're stuck waiting, make it entertaining. Play for free at ChumbaCasino.com. Let's Chumba!
Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Especially when you start to go, oh my gosh, that sounds like my story. And I didn't think anybody else had experienced this or felt this way. But there's a whole load of people out there that are echoing, like, my life story. And I've heard people say so many times how strange it is to have that experience of learning that there are so many other people that, have gone through the same processes of being fearful, but recognizing something was wrong, until one day that kind of outweighs the fear, and then, as you've described, kind of the glass shatters. And I'm just wondering sort of how you became more involved over time, and what did your responsibilities change and grow? And you mentioned your family as well. So did you meet in the group, or did you introduce your partner to the group?
So my partner, my ex partner, my ex-wife, we met before the group, but when we were very young. So when we hadn't seen each other for years and years and years. But if you remember, I said that I got involved in this through a high school friend. His sister was my ex, and
Right.
so we kind of re-met when this started in the group, right? And then we're living together within the group, had a relationship within the group, and then we're married within the group by the group leader, right? And at some point in the relationship, I believe when things were kind of starting to fall apart, we were kept together, I believe, by the group as well. And it sort of felt a little bit of a combination between, in the beginning, like kind of like, oh, they say like a love marriage, but towards the end, it felt more like kind of like an arranged marriage. And the weird thing too, being in a group like this, is you have this other leader that you confide in, that you're supposed to be even closer with than your spouse. And that's a weird kind of environment that not a lot of people are used to. Like when I'm with a partner, I'm with a wife, I'm with a girlfriend, like that's supposed to be like your other half. You're close, you're kind of like vulnerable with them, you're open with them, you have this relationship. But think about adding a third person into that. So this person would use stuff I say behind my wife's back and use stuff my wife said behind my back. And it's like, how do you form intimacy? How do you form trust? How do you form a true layer there of what I would call like, spousal needs, right? It kind of never really formed, And so over the years, I spent about 8 years in this group. It started off kind of fringe, and then it became, then she kind of, the leader wanted me to come back to New York, work for one of the cult companies. I did. My ex-wife worked for one of the cult companies, and, that's kind of how things went for a while. And then, they started these restaurants, and that's when things got really insane, and people were, giving up all their time. They were working 24/7. They get no breaks. They can't see family. They're isolated from family. One of the things that I was lucky, I never got that far in where I was isolated from family that deeply. I kind of could sense it. And they do say like one of the things with exiting these groups, people who kept in touch with the outside world a little bit more, they find it a little easier to exit and to reintegrate. Whereas like people that give up everything and join and isolate, and it's a little harder to reach them. So I spent a few years there in the group. And then in 2021, my daughter was born. And, and then the leader of the group at that point, essentially my wife had preeclampsia. And it was a dangerous condition, and they wanted to induce, and the leader of the group was telling us not to, which could put both my first child and my wife in danger. And her brother at the time was trying to support this leader also when talking with us. And, it was crazy. I mean, they said it was because of some, ritual or something, but the bottom line is that my child had to come out, right? That's the safest way to prevent a health issue there. And they were like, no, the doctors are evil, the doctors are dark, they're channeling dark forces. And it's basically a narcissistic way to control the whole situation, right? Which it should be this beautiful moment, it should be this celebratory thing, and it just became this really stressful, because not only am I having my first kid, which is stressful in its own right, then there's a medical condition, which is a second layer of stress. And then now I have this cult leader telling me, like, don't listen to doctors, and it's like, so I went down to the garden the night before my daughter was born, and I just like said like a real sincere prayer. I said, look, I don't care about any of this stuff. I was like, God, just please help me get this baby out, like safely. And my daughter was born the next morning, and that's when I first kind of realized like something is not right here. And then about 4 months later, my daughter's about 5 months old, and, I was out in Los Angeles for work. And I guess at that point we had moved upstate, to where the cult was kind of based, in upstate New York. We're living with them, and I'm giving, service at the restaurant in the evenings, working during the day. I get, this text message after coming back from California. I guess the leader didn't like that I went out to California. She didn't, again, I'm an uncontrollable human being, right? So it's like, eventually you're going to clash with a cult leader. Like when you're uncontrollable, like someone's got to go.
Yeah.
And, so she tried to threaten me with 15 people, on a text message. She sent a text message with everybody in the group on it. And basically, said, you're serving the dark army, the dark forces, you're full of ego. I won't be there to help you anymore. If you continue this behavior, your life's going to become a bankruptcy, and I'm going to separate you from your daughter and your wife. And that was kind of like the final blow for me, and then I spent the next 2 weeks in a really bad state of depression, and in really dark depression, because this is your whole life for 8 years, and then you get threatened like that. But, I think she underestimated how powerful being a father is, and how powerful the love between a child and their parent is, because she doesn't have children. So she couldn't understand it, and it really just made me realize I don't want to be involved in this anymore, and then also nobody said anything to me, really. Nobody said, how you doing? That was, messed up thing to say, sorry that you had to deal with that. It was just radio silence, because the group is just, silent and obedient.
Right.
She's their God,
So this is all happening in 2021 with a newborn baby after an extremely stressful kind of labor period. And I just wonder, first of all, if there is a sort of behavior towards young families, children, babies in the group, and whether it's an exciting time for the group, whether it's a time where leaders are like, actually we shouldn't focus so much on babies, we should focus more on the work. And how was it being pushed and pulled during that time, having a newborn, doing all this work and traveling, and it's still kind of like COVID times as well. So things are still all a little bit weird.
Things were very weird. The group was pretty supportive of the kids, I will say that. And, the people in the group are not bad people, per se, right? They're not mean. They're pleasant enough, and, they understand, and they're sweet to the kids. And I never had an issue there. It's just, they kind of you got a little I don't know, I got a little listen, this is my daughter, and we're going to raise our kids the way that we see fit, to raise these kids. And I'm not letting anyone indoctrinate my kid. It's just not they're going to be who they're going to be. And there was talk of even creating a daycare center, and I'm like, oh my God, my wife's not going to quit her job that pays her money with insurance to go start a daycare center for you, and you're going to pay her whatever you think you should. And, it's not going to happen. So at that point, I'm again, I'm in my mind, I'm done, but I'm still physically there with the group, so I started to, kind of put together my plan to get out of there, to kind of whatever, escape or vacate, or, and, over that period of time, I think I slowly started to realize that it would be way more difficult for my ex-wife to leave her, her family, her brother. And just, I think that, over the years that there was a support system built within it that, existed, and it just kind of, became more and more difficult. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about all that, just because it's still kind of playing out. But, things fell apart. And
Yeah.
I had to, for me, I had to, anyone going through anything like that, you do at the end of the day have to prioritize your own mental health. You have to prioritize your own life and journey, especially if you have children. You need to be able to be there for your children. You need to be clear. You can't have these groups pulling you back in, because they're gonna re-enter your mind space, right, over and over again. You need to be clear. You need to be out of that kind of wavelength, and it's very difficult to do that when you're going in and out of these scenarios still with the same group. Like most, deprogrammers or, therapists that are involved, like with, people exiting high control groups, they're like, you need a clean break. Like you can't, and my whole struggle was for 2 years, I'm like mentally not there anymore, but I'm like still going in and out of the same people and the group and trying to kind of like navigate a family, but also not really wanting to be there anymore. So it wasn't easy, but again, I'll just emphasize, like, take care of your own mental health, prioritize that at the end of the day and kind of do what you got to do there and, distance yourself from these groups because, their subconscious, impact on you is more than you think. And then the one thing I just wanted to say is, one of the most important things for me is with spirituality is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there was a period when I came out of this where I just did not want anything to do with that. I didn't trust it. I didn't, it was like I was almost like very negative towards it. And then I kind of re-entered into it again. And the weird thing I was going to say is I had met this guy, Kevin, when I was really young.
His name written down here and circled it because you're like, and later we'll talk about Kevin. And just in case we didn't.
Kevin, I met him at a rehearsal studio, and I remember asking him, hey, what's up with this studio? Why do you have all these CDs? And this is when I was 17 years old. And he's like, oh, that's my father-in-law has a record label. And he makes music, world music or whatever. And I'm like, oh, cool. So Kevin, he had a wife or girlfriend named Johnny, and that was that, and we would hang out once in a while. And I never really asked much about his father-in-law at that point, So years later in the group, I start, getting involved. And like I said, I was always reading independently, like Ram Dass and Krishna Das and, kind of involved with that. And I started listening to Krishna Das. And then even a couple years after that, I'm watching the Krishna Das documentary, One Track Heart. And in the documentary is his daughter. And all of a sudden I realized that his daughter is Janaki and Kevin is his son-in-law. And this is 10 years after that initial moment that I walked into that rehearsal space. And it hits me like a lightning bolt. And I'm like, whoa. And at this point, I'm very much, like, again, listening to KD, I'm starting to feel this, connection with Neem Karoli Baba as well, who was his teacher. And I'm like, wow, like that's so weird and strange, that this is the thing that's keeping me from being fully indoctrinated. And the seed of it came, or the first experience with it came like 10 years before I was even involved with this, like when I was 17 and I was like playing metal and rock. And then when I exited the group years after that, another, let's say 10 years after that, right? 20 years maybe from the first initial thing, or 15, one of the first people I went and spoke to about this situation was Kevin. And the reason I spoke to Kevin about it was because Krishna Das was in a cult as well for a period of time. And he put a video out there. And I find it very hard to find people that can still practice spirituality sometimes, but can also speak to the cult, right? Experience. So I reached out to Kevin. I'm like, thank you for, tell Krishna Das, thanks for putting this video out there because it's very helpful content. And he's like, oh, if you ever want to, Krishna Das said you could give him a call. So I wound up talking to him about the whole experience and everything, right? And now I've talked to him a couple of times about it, and it just really helped me when I was exiting, get back to feeling okay about spirituality again and pursuing spirituality from my own angle and my own life. And he's the one that, again, gave me that quote of, doing these practices is about finding your own, heart, finding your own path, your own way, trusting yourself, anyone who's going to tell you what's right and wrong, you got to run as far away as you can from a person like that. You need to figure out what's right for you and your path, So that was a very trippy thing with, meeting Kevin at such a, that seed at such a young age. And then, seeing him while in the group and kind of reinforcing like that, model of KD and that kind of community, and then years later, like being able to now talk about that after leaving. Very, very weird.
You're thinking about, leaving spirituality and kind of wellness and everything behind altogether, and then this situation unfolds, and you're like, hang on a minute, this is a bit too much. Those types of things freak me out.
Yeah, well, because there are healthy groups, right, Casey? Like that's the thing. Even you read, different leaders in the space that write about it and talk about it, and there are healthy groups.
And healthy practices. It's just when the wrong people use those things to exploit others. And it's such a shame. You talked about how much meditation still helps you now and how you're able to kind of discern which parts of yourself you wanted to keep, which parts you didn't, that you associated with the kind of like unhealthy group practices. But going through that process and detangling everything and unweeding everything, sometimes it's too much, it's overwhelming. Some people will never go through that process. Some people spend a whole life going through that process. The whole rest of their lives is a recovery journey that never really ends. But it's so sad, again, not just to hear people talk about the positive characteristics that they had pre-cult that they feel that, have kind of been tarnished, but also the positive practices like, grounding yourself and meditating and breathing, all of those things that, some people can't return to because it's too upsetting, it's too difficult, it's too traumatic. It's just associated with the cult.
Well, I think a lot of people too, like, it's such a traumatic experience because it can be a very traumatic experience. And I would never denote anyone's experience that's been through something like this and how long it takes them to personally recover from something like this. I mean, these groups, there's emotional abuse, there's psychological abuse, a lot of them there's sexual abuse.
Lots of financial, yeah, absolutely.
Human trafficking, labor trafficking, tax evasions, all types of like things that happen within these groups and to all different levels of extremity. And, a person's ability to overcome this, you can never judge that, My whole take on it though is like, this happened, okay? I'm not going to look at it as a negative thing anymore. I'm going to look at it as something that happened that gives me the ability to help others and potentially share the story at least, and you take what you want from the story, whether you think one way or the other. That's all it is. I have no bias towards it. Like there were, my time spent in the group, there were positive aspects of it. I got into meditation. I got into learning how to, run a business. I got into learning how to, be a little bit more mindful of how I spend my day and how I present myself. So I can't say that there were like everything was bad, right? That's, but I think the most important thing to remember is you did that, right? Sure, there's an energy or there's a force or there's a life force that exists, that created all this, but your wins are your wins and your losses are your losses. A lot of times these groups, they try to take credit for your wins. And then if you have
and blame you. Yeah.
Your wins are your wins and your losses are your losses. And sure, like some larger thing is creating all of Earth and no one's arguing that, yeah. But like if I get up in the morning and I decide to work that morning and learn something new, or I decide to watch sports all morning, right? One of them is maybe a little bit more productive than the other one. But who am I to judge what someone does with their life, right?
And maybe depending on who you're asking, they're both a win.
Exactly. Like maybe that person just needs to zone out for the day, right? And so that's what always like kind of drove me a little crazy about these groups is they like, again, they try to take credit for the wins in your life, like, oh, this is happening because of this, and you're following that. But then if something bad happens, it's like, oh, like, see, you weren't fully committed or you weren't fully devoted. And it's like, no, man, life is an up and down journey and all humans go through that. And sometimes you're going to win and sometimes you're going to have tough moments. And that's just the way that life is. But at the end of the day, like you got out of it. You got out of the group. You took responsibility for your own life and your own journey. And that's the greatest service I think you could do for God, is take responsibility for your own journey here. Whatever that means to you. Maybe just be a great parent. You don't need to build $1 billion business. Or if you do build a business and you want to donate or use it for good, great. But like, there's no difference, right? We just want to show up as the best version of ourselves each day,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the kind of wellness practices that you've mentioned that I think are exploited and are a way of predators to take advantage of people, are based in things like vulnerability and connection and openness. And again, these are positive things that we carry with us that can change our lives for the better or be used by other people to benefit them. It's so hard to go through that process, but I think you're so right in everything you've said about, just being a bit kinder to ourselves and recognizing our wins as our own. And that can be empowering, right? Something good happens and you're like, yes, I recognize where I impacted that. And I think that's great. And also just to recognize something from before, when you're putting this text chain with 15 other people and you're being kind of berated in front of everybody, these kind of public humiliation rituals can happen even if you're not in physical proximity to a group. And I think that just shows the power a leader can have, even if you're not with, in a room with a group of people in a circle of chairs, or you're called up to the pulpit or anything like that. And just to kind of hear that nobody in that text chain reached out to ask how you were, and that just speaks to the power of conformity and how tough that must have been as well. Oh, one person reached out.
One out of 15, and to be honest, I look at it as like I try to look at it as a nice person doing a nice thing, but I don't know why they were reaching out. That's the thing. She could have been like, hey, can you reach,
trying to feed back information to the group? Yeah, maybe.
Beyond her. I mean, you have with these kind of groups, the flying monkey. Have you ever heard of that? It's a term for when these narcissistic leaders kind of deploy these, they're kind of devotees on other devotees, right? Other people in the group. And then you have the triangulation, which is very popular with narcissism, right? They tactical. Where they're,
but this particular thing that this leader's done here, I don't know how you think about it in terms of narcissism, but I feel like this person tried so many different ways to control you through, kind of being a third person in your marriage, trying to have a say in the birth of your daughter. You've mentioned being uncontrollable, and narcissists can't deal well with that. So slowly over time, she revealed herself, right? Her true self. And, just, I'm going to kick you out and separate you from your family. Like, that's an ultimate narcissistic move in showing exactly who they are, because they can't control you. And that's not something a narcissist does well with, being told no.
Well, she even told my ex-wife, I can't control Michael, so I'm going to use you.
Oh.
She blatantly said that like once, And if I ever write a book, it's going to be called Uncontrollable, let me tell you. But yes, 100%, they're these types of people, these leaders of these groups, they're also very good at, they're very socially aware, and they're very good at identifying, what within you they can work with. What works within me that won't work within Casey, that won't work within Joseph or Anley or whatever, Sarah. They figure out what works in that specific person, and they motivate and move with that. And me, it was career, it was business, it was building me up to be this, type of leader for the group like that. Whereas another, it was more about their seeking and their enlightenment, and they want to be enlightened. And because I always could give a crap about them being enlightened. Like it seemed like a bummer anyway, okay, I'm enlightened. Now what do I do with the next 40 years of my life? Now I'm going to sit around, so like, but you'll find a way, right, to specifically infiltrate your own like desires and needs and value system, and then kind of use those, to manipulate you. So that's what you got to watch out for with narcissists, is that type of behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know that you've mentioned there's potentially some things in the works, and there's, your situation is still unfolding in some aspects. So I don't know if there'll be an opportunity for us to talk again in the future where you might be able to maybe give us a bit more insight into certain things and go into some more details about things that we can't fully explore today for various reasons. But I would love to have that kind of catch up conversation if the opportunity ever comes around. And you've had so much insightful stuff to share with the listeners today. It's clear that you've gone from this experience and sought even further more down the kind of the cult realm and understanding, what happened to you and what's happening to other people. And I think it's always really, it feels hopeful when people come to these conversations and they have all of the language to describe the mechanisms that they experienced. And, people have gone out and learned exactly what processes they were put through in order to be, attempted to be controlled. And then we can have these conversations with other people, and they can have those conversations, and maybe they could say, oh my gosh, that's what's happening to my sister. I had absolutely no idea, and it's like you said before we hit record, just being able to have these conversations to maybe stop this from happening to the next Michael. You just don't know what the ripple effect is. And I think it's really powerful when people come and share their stories. So I can't really thank you enough, Michael, in coming and sharing your wisdom and, your education and the things that you've learned through all these different things you've put together.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. Thanks for being a platform for this. When it comes to educating people about this stuff, I think we've seen a rise in this topic in the true crime kind of, genre, and just overall like a public perception of it. I think that these types of platforms are the most important thing, because there aren't a lot of great laws around this type of stuff to protect people. So I think by using content, by using different types of media, this is doing that work right now of preventative awareness and also building community for people exiting. I think people need content. They need to feel connection after these types of things happen to them. I would just like to end by saying that, like, anybody in a situation like who might be hearing this, like, really trust your own heart. This is your life, right? You got one. This is it. You're in it. Trust your heart. You don't owe anybody anything. That's the main thing. You owe nobody nothing. You owe no allegiance. You owe no loyalty like that. Trust your own heart, your own mind, your own feelings, your own confusion. Like, there's a reason why you're feeling certain things in these types of situations, and do not ignore that feeling. It's a biological alert. Don't ignore it. Trust that stuff. Trust your own heart. Trust the way you're feeling in these types of situations, and don't be afraid. There's nothing anyone can do to you. That's what I was told, and I just want to relay that message as well. And it's probably the most important one that I received during my time. So
I think that's such a strong thing to end on. I usually wrap up the conversations by asking if somebody, is listening and they are going through these same experiences, what would you say? But you said it all. You summed it up perfectly.
Work. I know.
And a biological alert. I've written that down. That's so good. That's a fantastic little.
That's one of the things that the mind control of these groups, it can't override it. It's just ingrained in us. So that's why I always use that term.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm gonna pinch that one, and I'll give you credit when I use it in other episodes. You'll hear me say it from now on.
All right, cool.
Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to hopefully a catch-up episode where we can discuss more things. But until then, Michael, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
You're welcome, and thank you too.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, you know, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.